Today's daf, we're going to be learning a Shevuot, daf Kafdalid, Shavuot Tov to everyone. This week's daf is sponsored by Devorah Lopez in loving memory of her mother on her 51st year at site. She had great strength and abundant love. This week's daf is sponsored by the Futronic family in honor of Shira's 21st birthday, Mazal Tov. And this week's daf is sponsored by Yisrael and Masha Rotman for a Refuah Shlema, complete and speedy recovery for Elishava Mindel Bat Masha Tzivia. Okay, we're going to get started with a quick review of the end of yesterday's daf. Very important to get that clear before we move on. We had in the Mishnah two contradictory lines, or seemingly contradictory lines. We had the first line, which said, if you take a shvuah shelo ochal, both cases talked about a shvuah that I won't eat. Okay? It sounds like I won't eat any food. So the first line said, well, that doesn't include, well, it's a little hard to define this exactly right now, but sort of inedible items or foods that I will not eat. So we assumed that that means, right, I won't eat means I won't eat anything that I usually eat. So that wouldn't include dust, we assumed, and it also means it wouldn't include non-kosher food, which means if you ate non-kosher food, right, you would be exempt. However, the next line says, if you say I take an oath I will not eat, a general statement, and then you ate nivalota trefot katzim masim non-kosher food, there's a machloket, but the rabbis say you're obligated. Rabbi Shimon says you're exempt. So the question is, why do the rabbis opt? Well, first the question is, how do we resolve that contradiction? Okay, so to resolve the contradiction, again, if I ate non-kosher food after saying I will not eat generally, first statement said you're not obligated, right? What are you not obligated? Let's just review. Shvuat bitoy laharau leitiv, right? You take an oath to say I will do or won't do, or I won't do or will do something, and you go against it, you have to bring this korban olav yoreh, the sliding scale offering, if by accident, right, you forgot and then ate it. So if I eat the non-kosher food after saying I won't eat, according to sentence one, I won't be obligated the korban. According to sentence two, I will be. So how do we resolve it? And if I did it intentionally, I'll have to get lashes. So how do we resolve it? The first resolution the Gemara brought was, let's say that it's not really as simple as it sounds. The first case, I just said I won't eat generally. That doesn't include non-kosher food. But if I said I won't eat food, or even I won't eat non-kosher food, then if I eat the non-kosher food, I will have to bring the sacrifice because I specified that I'm also including non-kosher food. So I said shvuah shelo chal, and right, not just regular food, I also won't eat non-kosher food, and then you're obligated. And for this, and this is why we're going to get off on a long tangent, for this there's a machloket, and we saw this a few times already, between Rab and Shmuel and Rabbi Yochanan, which we're really going to call basically Rabbi Yochanan, and Rish Lakish. So Rabbi Yochanan is going to say, oh, why doesn't this work? Again, this is just review of yesterday. Why does this work if I say everything? Also kosher, also non-kosher, theoretically, right? Mushba va'ome mehar Sinai. I'm already commanded not to eat non-kosher food, so why should he even apply the non-kosher food, right? We have this principle, ein shvu chalal shvua, ein isur chalal isur, right? You don't have additional ones ah, unless it's an isur kolel, okay? Which is, since I'm adding and I'm saying, in other words, there's two sets, there's kosher food, non-kosher food. Since I'm saying an oath that applies to both sets of kosher food and non-kosher food, so since it applies to the kosher food, it'll apply to the non-kosher food as well. That's Rabbi Yochanan. Rish Lakish doesn't think this, and we're going to have to say, why doesn't Rish Lakish say this? It would have been a good explanation. But to explain this question of what happened to Mushba Ome Mer Sinai, that shvuah shouldn't even be applicable to non-kosher food because can't eat it anyway from her Sinai. So Rish Lakish says, again, we've seen this a bunch of times, which is either you mafarish chatzi shir, or according to the rabbis, or stam and aliba de Rabbi Eliezer. Okay, which means what? Which means that either there's two possibilities, which is if you're the rabbis and you think that generally shvuot are not applicable to less than a shiur, but if you say I'm going to forbid even a little bit, then actually you'll be obligated. And then, according to Rabbi Eliezer, according to Rabbi Akiva, even if I don't say anything, any shvuah is chal on anything. So that means that at anything, we're going to end up with the shvuah is going to apply because the forbidden, the prohibition is specifically to um, the prohibition is specifically for a shear, a kazait, and the Shevuot is even on less. Okay, I see there's some issues with internet, so I'm going to pause for a second, see if I can fix them. Okay, hopefully that fixed the internet. Let's move on. So now we have Rabbi Yochanan and Rish Lakish each differently, right, in a different manner, explain why, how we deal with this fact. Once, right, if we explain, again, we have to go back, and there's one thing I wanted to point out that's a little bit confusing, which is we're using stam and faresh in two different ways here. In the resolution to the contradiction in the Mishnah, stam was saying, I just won't eat. And Mefarish was saying, I won't eat, and I also won't eat non-kosher food. And that's what led, Rabbi Yochanan to say, oh, it's an Isur Kolel. You added more things. Rish Lakish says, well, it's just because you were forbidding, right? You were forbidding specifically less than a shear, it's going to apply. Now, when Rish Lakish talks about stam and mefaresh, he's talking about, did you specify the amount that I'm going to be liable even for less than a shear, or did you not specify the amount? That's a different stam and mefaresh. That's just a side point. So now what the Gemara is going to do is try to analyze Rish Lakish and Rabbi Yochanan's positions. Okay? And basically they're going to ask three questions. The first one on Rish Lakish, the second two on Rabbi Yochanan. And that's what we're going to start our daf today. We'll go back a little bit to the end of yesterday's daf, which is Bishlam Rabbi Yochanan, it's 4 lines from the bottom. Lo amar Rish Lakish, timokim lan lemanitim ledivrei hakol. Rish Lakish has to say, well, if you're Rabbi Akiva, then you didn't have to specify anything about a shiur, because he anyway is, the minimum amount, right? You're chayav for anything, and therefore it'll apply, because by Torah law, you're only liable for a kazat. According to the rabbis, you'd have to say you specified a chatzi shiur. So even though he does explain it according to everybody, but it's a different way to read the Mishnah according to Rabbi Akiva, and a different way to read it according to the rabbis, that's already much more complicated. Rabbi Yochanan, by saying Yisro Kolel, it explains everything, right? You don't have to start saying, oh, depends on if this, if that. So that's why Rabbi Yochanan didn't hold like Rish Lakish. Ella Rish Lakish, my time alone, Amar Rabbi Yochanan, but why didn't Rish Lakish hold by Yisro Kolel? Now, Amar Lacha, and we're going to see that this is actually a bit of a debate. Amar La, ki amrina Yisro Kolel be'Yisro haba me'elav. Be'Yisro haba yedei atzmo lo amrina. So now we're going to say, see, I'm still having internet issues. I don't know why. Okay, but hope for the best. So Rish Lakish says, when we say Isur Kolel, we're talking about an Isur Haba Me'elav. But Isur Haba Yidei Atzmo Lo Amrina. When you have an Isur Kolel, that might be true by something that's prohibited by Torah law, and then a further prohibition by Torah law, where it all happens on its own. But it's different if you bring it upon yourself. A Shevuot, just because Isur Halal Isur, and now let's give an example. So Rashi gives a classic example, which we'll see in the Gemara later. You eat nevela on Yom Kippur. Okay? If I eat a nevela, okay, now this animal died on its own, wasn't slaughtered properly, I'm not allowed to eat it. Then comes Yom Kippur and adds an additional Isur. Okay? So because Yom Kippur now adds that not only, now this is exactly the same idea, not only is the nevela forbidden to me to eat, but all foods are forbidden to me to eat. So that's an Isur Haba Me'elav. That comes on its own, right? I didn't do anything to make that happen. Just Yom Kippur came and it happened. But maybe that's when Isur Kola works. But who's to say it works when I bring it upon myself? Maybe I don't have the power to be able to do Shvuah Kolele. So that's why Rish Lakish didn't want to go with Isur Kolel, because this isn't an Isur. This is a Shvuah. That's something, haba al piatzmo, right? That came by me. I brought it upon myself. Maybe Shvuah Kolelet doesn't work. So that's why Rish Lakish didn't use Rabbi Yochanan's explanation. So that was difficulty 1 on Rish Lakish. Now we're going to have 2 difficulties on Rabbi Yochanan. It's going to be the same structure. We're going to say, this makes a lot of sense according to one, but according to the other, how do we understand it? Bishlam ala Rish Lakish, mishum hachi patar Rabbi Shimon. Oh wait, let's go back to this line in the Mishnah. It's not, we've been explaining all along now why the rabbis obligate. If I said, again, according to this interpretation, I said, I'm not going to eat, and I'm not going to eat non-kosher food also. Right? I'm not going to eat any food, and I'm not going to eat non-kosher food. Now, the rabbis obligate, and that was our whole question. Why? You're already mishpavome mehar Sinai. And then we said, either Isur Kolel, or you were mifaresh, according to the rabbis, less than a shear, or Rabbi Akiva, where it's anyway, Shavuos Chalal, less than a shear, and that's why it applies. But if you say, now, but That was all to explain the rabbis. Rabbi Shimon in the Mishnah exempts. Rabbi Shimon says this doesn't apply. So now, which one does this fit better? Well, it actually fits better for Rish Lakish because you could say Detanya. Okay, now this fits perfectly with Rabbi Shimon's approach. Why? The whole reason Rish Lakish says this applies is because you're not actually mushbavome mehar Sinai unless then a shiur. Because by Torah law, you're only obligated for kazayit, and your Shevuot forbade you less, which either because you specified or because Rabbi Akiva says all Shevuot do less. But Rabbi Shimon himself, and this is going to connect the two opinions we learned so lately of Rabbi Shimon, did Tanya Rabbi Shimon Omer Kol Shulamako, Amru Kazayda Lil Korban. If you remember, Rabbi Shimon says that every single requisite amount in the Torah, right? There is no requisite amount for lashes. If something's forbidden by Torah law, even if you eat a little bit, you're going to get lashes. So therefore, if I forbid myself in the oath for less than a shear, it doesn't make a difference because that was already forbidden by Torah law. So that's a classic mushba v'ome mehar Sinai, and that won't work. And remember, he doesn't hold by Isur Kolel. So because it's an Isur Habal Yidei Atzmo. So you're not going to be able to say, well, he added more things and that's why. And the only reason would be because this is for less than a shear and that applied, but it doesn't apply because there's nowhere it's already forbidden by Torah law, the less than a shear. And that explains perfectly. Ela Rabbi Yochanan, my time de Rabbi Shimon de Patal. Now, according to Rabbi Yochanan, the truth is I already just explained this, but we're going to have to say, right, according to Rabbi Yochanan, first the Gemara is actually going to ask, if it's Isur Kola should work, it should work for a Shevuah also. Okay, so now they're actually going to say something different than I just said. I just said maybe you'll distinguish between Shevuah and Isur, like we said a minute ago, but that actually is not what they say here. Sorry that I included that. That was just my brain was thinking in a particular way, but it's not what the Gemara says. So now they're going to say, according to Rabbi Yochanan, why would Rabbi Shimon have any reason to exempt? If we say Isur Kolel, then Isur Kolel should apply. You included more things, the Shevuah should go on that, and because of that, it should also go on the non-kosher food. So why does Rabbi Shimon exempt if you ate non-kosher food? Midi utama el mishum Isur Kolel. Wait, isn't it because Isur Kolel? Okay, where that's going to be consistent with another opinion we know of Rabbi Shimon. And we never learned this, but we're going to learn it right now. Rabbi Shimon l'ta'amei deleli Isur Kolel. Rabbi Shimon actually doesn't hold by Isur Kolel at all. Forget about by Shevuot. He doesn't even hold it by Isurim. D'Tanya. Rabbi Shimon Omer. Here's our example that I gave before. Ha'ochel nevela b'Yom Kippurim patur. You eat a nevela on Yom Kippur, you're exempt from Yom Kippur. Okay, it's not karet, but you have because you ate a nevela. That's a regular lo taseh. But the Isur of Yom Kippur does not add an additional prohibition onto the nevela, according to Rabbi Shimon, and then that works perfectly. He doesn't, right? According to Rish Lakish, the Torah forbade already less than a shear, so there's nowhere for the Shevuah to go. According to Rabbi Yochanan, there's nowhere for the Shevuah to go because there's no such thing as an Isur Kolel, and for sure there's no such thing as a Shevuah Kolel. Okay, that was question 2. We resolved that. Question 3 on Rabbi Yochanan, we're actually not going to resolve. And this is based on a Mishnah we're going to see further on in tomorrow's daf, which is okay, let's go back to Shevuot Bitoy. The Torah says, if somebody is levatebes fatah, right, expresses with their mouth, and they say lahara o lehitif. Either they're going to not do something or they're going to do something. And that's why we always have the example, Shvuah she'ochal or Shvuah she'lo ochal. Now, what the Mishnah there says is that every Shevuah you make, in order for it to be a Shevuat Bitoy, on which you will be obligated this sliding scale offering if you accidentally don't keep to your oath, right? You forget you made the oath and then you don't keep it. You bring this sliding scale offering. Well, that is going to be, okay, only if the words you expressed, I will or I won't do something, could have been expressed also in the reverse. Meaning, if I say I will eat, it would have worked if I said I won't eat. Or if I say I won't eat, it would have worked if I say I will eat. Okay, we'll see why this is relevant in a minute. That's going to be called lav vehen. Since the Torah says lahara uleitiv and gives both options, any oath for it to be considered a Shevuat Bitoy that you'll be obligated this korban has to be something that could be said in both directions. So let's read. Bishlam ala Rish Lakish, mishkach ala belav vehen. Rish Lakish says it's less than the shiur, basically, you were referring to in the oath, right? Either according to the rabbis, because you specified, I won't eat even a morsel, Or according to Rabbi Kiva, you just Stam said, and any Stam Shvuah is less than a Shiur. Then we could see how you could make that oath in Lav Vehain. Why? Because you could say, right? Well, the oath you said in the Mishnah was, I won't eat even a morsel. Okay. And I will eat, you could say, I swear I will eat a morsel of food or even non-kosher food. Now, by Torah law, I can do that because I'm only forbidden to eat a kazayit by Torah law. So I could theoretically, I mean, not that we, say you should do this ideally, but theoretically, I wouldn't be doing anything. I wouldn't go against what the Torah says if I say I will eat less than a minimum amount of the food. But Elila Rabbi Yochanan, Bishlam alav mishkachala, Elahain hechi mishkachala. But if I say Shvua, that, right, if the whole reason, really having internet issues, I don't know why, but okay, I'll wait a minute. Hopefully it'll clear up. But to Rabbi Yochanan says, Bishlam alav mishkachala, Elahain hechi mishkachala. If you're Rabbi Yochanan, now according to Rabbi Yochanan, there's no issue about the requisite amount. That's not the factor here. The factor is that it applies because it's an Isur Kola, right? We're assuming the Shvuah applies only at a kizayit. I'm forbidding myself from eating a kizayit, a requisite amount of non-kosher food in addition to the kosher food. And it applies because since it applies to the kosher food, it applies also to the non-kosher food. But that's because I said, sure, that I won't eat non-kosher food. And therefore, right, that applies to one, it applies to the other. But what if I said, I swear I will eat, and again, add in a requisite amount, because that's what we're assuming this means, according to Rabbi Yochanan. I swear I will eat a requisite amount of food, and even non-kosher food. Now, there's no such oath as I will eat non-kosher. It won't apply to non-kosher food because I'm not allowed to eat a requisite amount of kazayit, an olive bulk of non-kosher food. So, right, until now, we've been saying, I can't make an oath on something that's already forbidden in the Torah because I'm already forbidden. So I can't add another prohibition. So that's called Mushma Ome Mehar Sinai, and therefore I can't add another one to that. But I certainly can't take an oath to not do what I was Mushma Ome Mehar Sinai to yes do. Okay, if I can't eat kosher, non-kosher food, I can't say I swear I'm going to eat non-kosher food. Can't do that. That's against. Right? It's not just you're saying the same thing twice. This is against what the Torah says. So, according to Rabbi Yochanan, there actually can't be a hain case here. You can't ever make an oath that I'm going to eat kosher, non-kosher food. And therefore, how would this ever apply? Okay, since it doesn't apply to hain, it doesn't apply to lav. And then the shvuah wouldn't apply. Yeah, it would apply to the kosher food maybe, but it won't apply to the non-kosher food. So then what the Mishna says doesn't make any sense according to this. Therefore, the Gemara rejects this first explanation because it doesn't fit according to Rabbi Yochanan. Now, it could fit according to Rish Lakish, so you could have just said that. And there's a bit of, I should just say, lack of clarity about what this next word means. Okay, some people think that this is actually coming to explain that question we just asked about Rabbi Yochanan, but we're going to go with Rashi, who says that this next line is coming as a totally second answer. Okay, we finished with answer one. We ended with a difficulty against Rabbi Yochanan with answer one, and we're going to now go to answer two. Before we go to answer two, I'm just going to review. We had a contradiction between two lines in the Mishnah. One seemed to imply you'd be not liable if you ate kosher food, and one seemed to imply you would be liable. They both seem like the exact same case. So the way we explained it is they're not really the same case. One is you just said I won't eat, and then that doesn't include non-kosher food. The other one is you said I will not eat, and I will also not eat non-kosher food. And then, right, and then you ate shvuah shalochal, and I won't even eat non-kosher food, and then that will apply, right? Either because it's an Isur Kolel, or because you specified, specifically we're talking about less than a Shiur, or maybe Rabbi Akiva, who doesn't even need the specification. Those were the two ways to do it. We then questioned, right? Three questions, one on Rish Lakish, two on Rabbi Yochanan, and then ended with the difficulty of Rabbi Yochanan because there is no case of hain. There's no case where you could say, I swear I will eat non-kosher food, so it's a little difficult to Rabbi Yochanan. Now comes Rava, Elakid de Rava. So assuming we go with Rashi's interpretation, this is a second answer to Amarava. Shvuah shalochal. Okay, what Rava's going to do basically is say the whole inference in the first place was wrong. We took this line that said, if you say Shvuah shalochal, and then you ate o ma'achalim she'enam ru'iyim la'achila, foods that you cannot eat, okay, that are not capable of being eaten, which we assumed included non-kosher food. Now, the much simpler way to read the Mishnah is to say like Rava says, which is Da'amar Rava, Shvuah shelo chal v'achal afar patur. What the Mishnah is referring to when it says inedible foods is if you eat foods that are really inedible, like dust, dirt, okay? But it's not talking about a dead animal or creepy crawler creatures, which are forbidden to eat. Those are actually foods, okay? You'd be liable if you ate them, okay? Because they're just food. It includes any food, even if it's not food you normally eat. Okay, when I say, and this is a good question, right? I say, I swear I'm not going to eat. Do you mean like the normal foods you normally eat? Or, right, do you mean I swear I won't eat anything that comes under the context of food, which non-kosher meat will come into the context of food. It is food. It's just we're not allowed to eat it. We saw this before, right? It's like an ari that's, like a lion that's protecting it. You can't eat it, but it doesn't mean it's not food. So that's a much easier answer. And now the Gemara wants to further prove that from the last line of the Mishnah. However, this proof will be rejected. Amar of Mary, and actually I would say in a very interesting manner. Amar of Mary, Af Ananami Tanina. So Rav Mary says, I'll prove it from the last line of our Mishnah. What does it say? Konam ishti nehanetli machalti ayom. My wife will be forbidden to me if I ate today. And what does the Mishnah say? What if he ate food earlier in that day that was not kosher food? It applies. So what do you see here? The word food, right? I swear I didn't eat food. Now this is on the past, okay? But it should make a difference. You say, I swear I didn't eat food today. And it turns out you ate non-kosher food. So that right now, here you didn't exactly say, I swear I didn't eat. You said, if, I'm going to wait a second because my internet I see is unstable. I'll let it go. Okay. If I ate today, then my wife will be forbidden to me. And it turns out you ate non-kosher food. So the vow applies, the kona. So now, and therefore, what do you see? Food includes even non-kosher food. Great proof. Not really. Gemara says, hachi hashta, what? That's not the same. Hatam. Now, let's talk about why when I say I'm not going to eat food, okay? Past future is very different. When I say I'm not going to eat food, we assume I'm only referring to kosher food. Because what? Or at least you can't prove it from here that I'm not. Because what's the difference between the case of I didn't eat anything, right? If I didn't eat anything, then this vow will go into place. And then you ate, right? If I didn't eat, then there won't be, right? If I did eat, then the vow will go into effect. And then it turns out you ate non-kosher food. Well, hachi hashta, you're going to compare those two. Hatam kebantam ikara achil v'hadar ishtabele chashuve achshave. Turning now to Amabet. Since I stand at the end of the day and I say, if I didn't eat, right? If I did eat, then this will go into effect, right? If I ate, and you already ate food before that, which means that you call that food. As a normal Jew who doesn't eat non-kosher food, when they get up and say, I'm going to not eat, okay, when I say I haven't yet eaten, who says I included non-kosher food? I wasn't ever intending to eat non-kosher food. When I said I won't eat, what I mean is I won't eat what I normally eat. So that means kosher food. So if I say on the future, it might actually, now remember, Rava says it still includes non-kosher food because it is food. But you can't prove it from this line because this line was talking about past. Once I already ate non-kosher food, I proved that I think non-kosher food is food because I ate it. Why else would I be eating it if I didn't consider it food? So that's like subjectively it became food because I already ate it. And if I stand at the end of the day and I say, if I ate today and I ate non-kosher food, that would be included. But that doesn't necessarily mean that my future would include it. Because in other words, if that didn't happen, right? And I'm a different person or, right? And I'm talking about what I might do in the future, that's a very different story. Because since I don't ever eat non-kosher food, I probably didn't really mean it. And therefore, you can't prove it from this line in the Mishnah. Again, Rava's answer still stands, which we are going to assume Shevuot that I won't eat will include anything edible, even if it's not kosher. But you can't prove it from that line because that line was talking about past, and you can't necessarily make that jump from past to future. Okay, so first part of the daf was dealing with that contradiction, which according to the second interpretation, we actually said isn't a contradiction at all because it was an incorrect implication from the Mishna, right? You thought ochel that's not roel achila includes non-kosher food. Who says? Maybe it's just inedible food. Okay. And then we had the first, which I already reviewed. Now Rava is going to have two statements, and then we're going to raise the difficulty on the second statement of Rava about this Isur Kolel. And now we're going to get a little more into what's an Isur Kolel and how is it different from another term, which is called an Isur Mosif. So just to give background again, there's something called Mushba V'Omei Me Har Sinai. We are all right sworn in at Har Sinai. Okay, we're going to have a right. There's a few shiurim on this topic, right? First of all, there's Alana Stein-Haynes part 1, which we're going to get to part 2 this week. Also, if you haven't listened in Din and Daf about this whole concept, which is fascinating concept, Moshe Bomei Marasina, obviously relates to Shevuot. Also, Rabbanit Yafi Clymer's Shiur is going to go up hopefully today about comparing Shavuot and Shvuot. Okay, a very good topic, relevant for now since we're heading into Shavuot next week. But this concept that something is forbidden, okay? There's in oaths, it's Mushba V'Omei Mer Har Sinai. You're already sworn in Har Sinai. How could you swear in and include something else? And let's go back before that to what this is based on, which is Isur Kolel, right? This idea of Ein Isur Chalal Isur, just like Ein Shvu Chalal Shvua. If something's already prohibited, can it not, right? We generally say something does not get prohibited twice unless there's an exception to the rule. And there's two exceptions. We discussed one, which is Isur Kolel, which we gave the example of Nevela on Yom Kippur, which is there's Nevela, right? It's already forbidden because the animal wasn't slaughtered. And then we added on to it, it was added to another set of items, which is now more foods are forbidden to eat because it's Yom Kippur. And because it applies to that set, it applies to that set as well. Okay, we have the set of non-kosher and kosher. Since your second prohibition applied to another set, it applies to both sets as well. Now we're going to talk about Isur Mosif. Okay, so the Rava says the following. Man tama demat. Now, Isur Kolel, we already saw there's a machloket, whether you hold Isur Kolel or not, right? We saw, for example, Rabbi Shimon doesn't hold by Isur Kolel, right? And then we have Rish Lakish who suggested that maybe Isur Kolel is true, but not Shevuot Kolel, okay? But we saw that Rabbi Shimon disagrees about Isur Kolel. So comes Rabbi and he says the following. Man tama demat ile Isur Kolel, midi have Isur Mosif. The one who holds Isur Kolel is because he also holds Isur Mosif. And if Isur Mosif works, then Isur Kolel should work. In a second, I'll explain what Isur Mosif is, but let's just finish the sentence. Uman lele, the one who doesn't hold Isur Kolel, but there's an assumption that everyone holds Isur Mosif, which we'll see in a minute what it is. So maybe we'll stop the sentence mid-sentence, but he's going to have to explain why you would say yes, Isur Mosif, and no Isur Kolel. Okay, so let's talk about what Isur Mosif is. Isur Mosif, I'll give you two examples. One is, okay, now, I suppose Isur Kolel was sets. There's two sets. One set is forbidden, one set is permitted, and then the Isur comes on the permitted set and the other one, right? So because it applies to the permitted, it applies to the other one. Isur Mosif is about the object itself gets forbidden additionally, okay? There's no extra set here. So let's say we have a woman who is someone's sister. So the man is forbidden to the woman to have relations, and she's forbidden to him in both directions. But let's talk about the man. The man can't have relations with the woman because she's his sister. Then she gets married. When she's married, she now becomes forbidden not only to him, but to many more people. Okay, so the issue is the prohibition is not just to one person now, the prohibition is to many people. It's not that there's new sets of things that are forbidden. There's nothing, this is the object that's forbidden. Okay, I'm not objectifying women here, but the woman is forbidden and she's now forbidden for more reasons. Okay, and because it applies to more people as well. It's not just more reasons, but it's a issur that applies to more people. Okay, that's one option. The other option is you have, let's say, chelev, forbidden fat. Okay, forbidden fat on an animal, there's chelev. It normally gets offered on the altar if you were bringing a sacrifice, and therefore we can't eat it as humans when we're regular, even if it's not a sacrifice. But let's say it was chelev that was used from an animal that was supposed to be sacrificed on the altar, and you didn't burn the chelev on the altar, and the next day it becomes notar, okay, or 2 days later, okay, I forget, right, I think I read it that next day it's notar, or maybe it depends on the sacrifice, whatever it is, it becomes now leftover. Now, there's an additional prohibition on that meat. This isn't something that applies to other things. It's just, right? It's just this piece of chalev is not only forbidden because it's chalev, it's also notar. So either, okay, these are either the object is forbidden to more people as well, besides just to you, or the object is forbidden for more reasons. More isurim got added onto it. Okay, that's an isur mosif. Now, everybody agrees in an isur mosif that it applies. So what Rava says is, okay, the one who holds isur kolel, it's midi dehave isur mosif. Just like isur mosif, isur kolel, what's the difference? They're really one and the same. One applies to more people, right? One applies to more objects, okay? One, right? One is the same object with either more people prohibited or more prohibitions on it. And one is more objects are prohibited, so we'll prohibit that one as well. That's the Yom Kippur Nevela example. So now they say, but manda lately, the one who doesn't hold it, is going to distinguish and say this distinction is important. Ki amrin an Isur Mosif b'chad chaticha. Isur Mosif is when that one item has more things added to it or more people that are forbidden to it. That we can say applies. But But just because we're going to forbid another set of foods, like all foods now are forbidden because you can't eat on Yom Kippur, doesn't necessarily mean we're going to apply that to the nevela, which was already forbidden in the first place. So that's not going to be the same. Okay? We're not going to apply one to the other. That's the first thing Rava says. So Rava basically says, I'm explaining to you why some people hold Isur Kolel and other people don't, when Isur Mosif everybody agrees about. V'amar Rava, the second thing Rava says, Lemandi ile Yisur Kolel, Amar Shvuah shelo chalte. If you hold Yisur Kolel, because you just said a minute ago, not everybody does. I'm going to pause for a minute because I'm still having internet issues. There's not much I could do about it, so I'm just going to have to go with it. Rava says, if you have Yisur Kolel, Amar Shvuah. So now, until now, we've been talking about Isur Kolel, and then we can apply it to a Shvuah as well, although Rish Lakish said maybe not, and now we're going to go back to something similar. If you hold Isur Kolel, like Nevela on Yom Kippur, you're going to be liable also for Yom Kippur. Then Shvuah Shelo Chal Te'inim, let's say I said, okay, forget about Mushpavome Mehar Sinai. Let's say I took two oaths. The first oath I said, I mean, it's really no different than Mushpavome Mehar Sinai, but they're bringing it to a different case. I say Shvuah Shelo Chal Te'inim, I won't eat figs. Then Chazar Ba'arma Shvuah Shelo Chal Te'inim Ba'anavim. That's a classic kolel, right? I now said I'm taking another oath that I won't eat figs and I won't eat grapes. So if you hold Yisur Kolel, then you'll hold also here. Since it applies to the grapes, it should apply to the figs as well. Migo de Chayal Anavim, because it applies to the grapes, Chayal Nami Ateinim will apply to the figs as well. To which the Gemara says, Pshita, isn't this obvious? Okay, what's the chidush here? But it's not obvious. We know it's not obvious because when we explained Rish Lakish on the very top of our daf, we said maybe this isn't so intuitive. Mao detema, you might have thought Isur habame elav amrinan, Isur habame atmo lo amrinan, kamash malan. You might have thought that an Isur kolel only works on a prohibition because the prohibition comes on its own. Yom Kippur comes and it kicks into place, not because of anything I did. But maybe if I bring it upon myself, maybe that's not the case, right? Maybe another oath on something that I already took an oath on maybe won't apply, even if I included other sets of items. Kamash malan, that's why Rabbi wanted to teach you it does apply. Okay, so now Rav is basically saying, kind of like we had said earlier in Rabbi Yochanan's approach, that so Rav basically agrees with Rabbi Yochanan and with Rabbi Shmuel that Isur Kolel applies to Shevuot. That's what we started the daf. Remember, we said, how could it be? Right? Because you must have said Shevuot shelo chal, kosher food and non-kosher food. And because you said kosher food, it included also non-kosher food, and that works for oaths. So Rav is in that school of thought. Now the Gemara Rava to Rava, okay, the Rava, the son of Rava also had a son Rava, not to be confused with Rava, okay. So Rava, the son of Rava, raises a difficulty on what Rava said here that Shvuah Kolel works, okay, Shvuah Kolelet works from a Mishnah in Kreitut, okay. In Kreitut it says, Yesh ochel achila achat. They love to give these cases, okay. You can eat one eating, okay, you swallow one piece of food, one morsel of food, or one kazayit of food. You could be liable for sin offerings and one guilt offering, okay? With one act, you could do 5 averot. Now, this is a bit of a game, I like to call it, right? Where the rabbis try to come up with What's the craziest case you could do where you're obligated the most? And this difficulty is based on that theory, and that's why I want to point it out here. Okay, we'll wait another minute or two till we get to where the difficulty is. So what's the case? Ve'eluhen, okay, here's a case. Tamesh achal chelev v'hu notar min hamukdashim b'yom kippurim. This is a combo of everything we talked about today almost, except for not nevela. But we have an impure person who eats chelev, the forbidden fats, of a sacrifice that was notar, it was left over beyond the designated time, and it was Yom Kippur. Okay? So what did this person do? Okay, first of all, a tamei person who eats sanctified items, not allowed to do that. That's what we learned in the first two chapters, and would have to bring, assuming this is all shogeg, because we're talking about bringing sin offerings, would have to bring a sin offering. That's the sliding scale offering, right? That we learned about many times. So you eat the okay. So number one, an impure person ate something that was sanctified for the temple. Number two, you ate chelev. That's classic korban chatat. You're not allowed to eat that. It was forbidden fats. Number three, you ate notar. It was left over. You can't do that. Number four, it was Yom Kippur. You can't eat it all on Yom Kippur. And what's the asham? Asham mi'ilot. You got benefit from consecrated item. So that's five. Now, Rabbi Meir Omer, this is just a total aside, but it's kind of funny. After my Shabbat, this is, you see their creative talents. If it was Shabbat, v'hotzio b'piv, they're missing a word here, b'piv chayav. If while you're eating it, we're trying to figure out while you're eating, you could be liable from one eating 5 different sin offerings, and 4 sin offerings and a guilt offering. But Meir says you could be five sin offerings and a guilt offering if while you were eating it, you walked out from a private domain to a public domain, and you basically took the item while it was in your mouth, you carried it out to the public domain. Kind of funny, right? So the rabbis say, Amrulo, eno min Hashem. No, that's not on our list. Why is that not on our list? Because that's not an isur achila. We're talking about things that forbidden to eat. It's forbidden to eat chelev. It's forbidden to eat a tamei person who eats, right, the sacrificial items. It's forbidden. All these things are forbidden for eating. That's forbidden for carrying. Okay, it happened while you were eating, but it's not because of eating that you're liable. That's why we didn't include it. Okay, that was an aside. Now here comes the proof of Rava, the son of Rabba, against Rava. In Ita, if you're right that a shvua, if you did the shvua kolelet and said this is forbidden in addition to things that were right, certain things that were permitted to me are forbidden, and certain things that are forbidden to me are forbidden to me by an oath, and you say them both together, it will apply. Well, then we could have, and then you'll what? Have to bring a korban olevi orev for shvua bitoy if you go against it. Well, then it should have, right? If you're going to be really creative, you could have had 5 sin offerings and 1 guilt offering. Im ita mishkacha lachamesh. Why? You could have had 5. Kigon she'amar shvua shelo ochal tmarim v'chelev. What if you said, I'm taking an oath that I won't eat dates and chelev? Migo d'chayal tmarim chayal anami achelev. Since it would apply to the dates, it would also apply to the forbidden fat. And then you'd actually be liable a 5th sin offering. So there you have it. Why, right? And there he says, must be it's not true. And that's a contradiction to Rav. The Gemara is going to bring 6 answers. And the gist of the answers are, what did this Tana decide to put in and what did the Tana leave off the list? In other words, let's come up with categories that the Tana was just talking about these kind of things. And that's not part of this category. Okay, so let's read. Number 1. Ki katane isur haba me'elav. Isur haba me'atzmo lo katane. This is a distinction we already made today. They didn't add shvua. Why not? Because this Mishnah was talking about prohibitions that could be upon you that come from the Torah, not because I put a prohibition upon myself. Shvua is a whole different category. The Mishnah just wasn't relating to that because that's a prohibition. It's only a prohibition because of what I said. Without an oath, it wouldn't be prohibited to me, right? So we're only talking about prohibitions the Torah said, not ones that I added. To which the Gemara says, wait a minute, that's not true. Look at one of the things on the list. Hekdesh, hare hekdesh. Now, the fact that I have to bring korban me'ilah, because I misused consecrated property, how did this animal get consecrated? I consecrated it with my words alone. This animal wasn't forbidden because it was sanctified, right, by God. It was sanctified by me. So that is something I brought upon it. They say, bibechor dikdushato merechem. No, you could say this was sanctified by God. It was the firstborn, which from the moment it was born, it was already sanctified. And that's an isur haba me'elav. It didn't come because of anything I did. Okay, number 2. Ibai tema ki katane midi delay le she'ela. Shvuadi le she'ela lo katane. It only included here items that can't be undone, prohibitions that are set, that can't be undone. Now, if I take an oath, I can always undo my oath. It's a process, but there's a way to undo an oath. Because there's a way to undo it, it wasn't mentioned here because we're only talking about things that are constants, not things that could disappear somehow. Okay, hare hekdesh. You could also undo hekdesh. So they say, no, how k'mina b'bechor? What do you mean? We already said this was a case of a bechor. You can't undo the sanctity of a bechor. Remember, a bechor has to be brought as a sacrifice. That's what we're talking about, a sacrificial item that was a firstborn animal, which gets sacrificed. Okay, third answer. Ibait ema, you could also say, ki katane korban kavua, korban olav lo katane. All the sin offerings mentioned are set chatats. They have to be animals. They're not sliding scale offerings. So maybe they were talking about finding a case where there's four set sin offerings and not sliding scale offerings, which we already talked about, are lighter because you can do only a meal offering if you want, not even an animal. So they say, wait, that's not true. They're not all not sliding scale offerings. Remember, tameh, hare tameh she'achalat hakodesh, de korbanu levi oredu. The tameh person that ate kodesh is the sliding scale also. You can't say this was only sliding scale, and that's why I didn't mention the Shevuot. So they say, no, binasi. Maybe it was a prince, okay, or a leader who did this. For Rabbi Eliezer, he da'amar nasi maybe seir. Okay, according to Rabbi Eliezer, if you're an asi who's impure and you ate sacrificial items, you actually have to bring an animal. You don't have this option of sliding scale. Now, to say this answer, it's a little bit weak because you have to say that the case was a nasi that was tameh and it should have mentioned it. Okay, so that's a bit of a weaker answer. Number 4, Rav Ashi Amar ki katane midi dechayle kishiur shvuah dechayle apachot mikishiur lo katane. Okay, you could say maybe it was only mentioning things that apply that need a requisite amount. But an oath, if you remember, we said an oath could mean, right, any amount. So maybe they didn't bring the oath because that applies to any amount, and all the rest of these Isurim need a requisite amount in order to be liable. So again, as long as you can make some distinction between the oath and the other cases, you have a claim as to why they didn't mention this in the Mishnah. And then that would explain why this isn't a difficulty to Rava, because theoretically it could have been mentioned. It's just the Tana decided not to because it didn't fit into the Tana's categories of what the Tana was at. Okay, hare hekdesh, but hekdesh doesn't need a kazayit. They're assuming requisite amount means kazayit, like eating chaylev is a kazayit, eating notar, you need to eat a kazayit. All those things you won't be chayav a korban unless you ate a kazayit. So they say, habinan shavapruta. No, hekdesh also has a requisite amount. It might not be a kazayit, but it is a shavapruta. It has to be a value to be chayav the asham me'ilot for misusing consecrated property. Okay, fifth and last answer for today. We'll have a sixth one tomorrow. The fifth and last answer is Rav Ashi me'aviria, Amar Rabbi Zera. Ki katanes dono karet. Dono lav lo katane. This isur v'shvuat bitoy is not karet. You don't get karet for not keeping your oath. It's just a lo tase, a regular negative commandment. All the other things, chaylev, notar, tame, okay, all those things and Yom Kippur, you get karet for. So that's why it's not on the list. They were talking about things that you bring a korban. If you had done them intentionally, you would have gotten karet for them. Okay, they say, what about Asham? Hare Asham does dono lav the katani, but wait, the Asham me'ilo, misuse of consecrated property, is just a negative prohibition. It's not karet. So they say, and by the way, to say it was all chatat makes sense because we're in Kritut, in this is a Mishnah in Kritut, which is all about karet. But they say, right, the katane, so they say, bechatat kamrina. No, what we meant is, all the korbanot chatat he mentions, the 4, as opposed to the 5th, which we tried to add, are all karet associated. The asham me'ilot is just an added one that there's also an asham. That doesn't have to do with karet, but it doesn't need to, okay? But in terms of the chatat, the sin offering, it was only ones that have to do with that. If you did it intentionally, you would get karet. Okay, and therefore, this is all 5 out of the 6. We'll get to the 6 tomorrow. Explanations as to why that doesn't contradict Rav. So what we did today were 2 basic things. One is resolve the contradiction or the seeming contradiction, which according to answer 2 wasn't even a contradiction. We misimplied something from the Mishnah, but the implication of the Mishnah, which, again, one thought non-kosher food is not included in your oath, and the other said non-kosher food is included in your oath. So 2 explanations as to how we get there. And then within the first explanation, we had to explain why the rabbis actually forbid it. Aren't you mishbah b'mei Me'ar Sinai? And then we gave the 2 explanations of Rabbi Yochanan and Rish Lakish, and then had 3 difficulties we raised on, 1 on Rabbi Yochanan, 2 on Rish Lakish. sorry, one on Rish Lakish, two on Rabbi Yochanan, and then resolve them. From there, we moved on to two statements of Rava about this Isur Kolel, comparing Isur Kolel and Isur Mosif was the first, and then saying Isur Kolel applies to Shevuot as well. And then Rava raised a difficulty from the Mishna and Krichut on this. If really Shevuot's Kolel works, then why wasn't this mentioned as a fifth sin offering in that list of something you could be liable for sin offerings and also one asham? Should have been five. We should have had a more creative case, right, where you could get even more. And then basically we had five explanations as to, well, the Talmud Mishna wasn't concerned with that case because he was keeping to a more limited type of case where it has all these criteria, right, and be liable all those. But Shevuot is outside of the realm of those things for all sorts of, we saw five possible reasons. That we finished for today. Wishing everyone a good day and apologies for the internet. I'm not really sure what happened this morning, but hopefully it was smooth enough. Have a good day, everybody. Shavuot tov.